Well, good afternoon, everyone, unless you're on the West Coast, and still good morning, I think, or close to noon. Thanks for being with us. I'm really pleased that we're having a great webinar here on additive manufacturing, and I want to get into that real quick, but I want to give you a quick overview of why we're here and how we got here from NCATC. A lot of you probably know, if you work with us, that we are all about the future work and smart automation and manufacturing, Industry 4.0, big part of what we've been doing for a long time. We call it a pillar. Two of our other pillars are work-based learning, coupled with apprenticeships, internships, co-ops, and even entrepreneurship. And we really focus on getting applied learning in practice across the nation with our community colleges and high schools, and make it a competency-based education where we can, and applied skills and knowledge. And all of that wrapped around with adult education, diversity, equity, and inclusion are a very big part of everything we do. So those are the pillars of NCATC. Our membership is across the nation, about 165 plus community colleges from Hawaii to Maine to Florida. And even more so in that vein, we've got 45 strategic corporate partners. And those folks in the alphabetical listing are here on the screen for you. And you can look at those on our website anytime. But two of them are here with us today, America Makes and Nocti. And we're very thrilled to have them talk to you about additive manufacturing and all that's been going on in their world for a long time as well. And speaking of that, America Makes is one of 17, I think now, maybe growing, manufacturing innovation institutes. A lot of people know them as Manufacturing USA. And the red hats across this map are the 8 that NCATC works with in their workforce and education councils. And we started way back 10 years ago with America Makes in Youngstown, Ohio. And you'll be hearing a lot more from Josh Kramer on that. But we work with all these that are listed in robotics, flexible electronics, etc., and are very happy to be sharing all that they're doing with our community colleges and vice versa. The Internet of Things and Industry 4.0, a lot of you are probably deep into that. Some of you may not even have touched that, but these are the 11 pillars, if you will, of Industry 4.0 smart manufacturing that we focus on a daily basis with our colleges and industries. And right in the middle, as you see in this graphic, is additive manufacturing. And so we're really thrilled to have that focus today in our webinar. The last thing I want to share with everybody, some of you were along with the journey with us, but some of you maybe didn't know, but we've been into this area for 20 years at NCATC, starting in 2001 with Saddleback College out in California and a National Science Foundation ATE grant that actually propped them up to do a nationwide center for rapid prototyping. And so if you look at the trajectory over the last 20 years, 3D printing's always been the moniker, if you will, of additive before it was coined more additive going forward, but also rapid prototyping. And then we moved into 2013 and we worked with a grant from the Department of Labor with Cuyahoga Community College. And two of our partners were America Makes and Tooling USME. A lot of good things have come from that you can learn about as well. And then fast forward beyond that point, 2016 and beyond to now, we've been working with the Apprenticeship Department of Labor area, again with America Makes, Tooling U, and Robert C. Byrd Institute. And we've stood up with everybody's help along the way, an actual additive manufacturing technician apprenticeship framework, which has been approved by DOL. All of that has happened in 20 years now. We celebrate 40 years of additive right now, and it was pretty much 1981, I think, when it was coined in Japan. And you'll hear a lot more about that history from Josh and John this morning or this afternoon. Without further ado, I want to introduce our main presenters today, our experts from America Makes and Nocti. John Foster is the president and CEO of Nocti and Nocti Business Systems, and Josh Kramer is the director of workforce and education development at America Makes. So I'll remind you all again, please type your questions in the chat box, and I'm going to stop screen sharing for myself and turn it over to John Foster. Thank you for being with us, everyone.
Thanks, Greg. Just give me a second here to switch the technology over, and we'll get things rolling. One more second. So I appreciate the introduction, Craig, and it's great to be with all of you. Josh and I have had a lot of fun over the last couple of months working on this little project, and as we go through the slides, I hope you'll see that. But kind of like following Craig's lead, we're going to go ahead and just give you an overview of our two organizations. So I'm going to go a little bit first here. So as you can see from the screen, we were founded back in '66, and we were founded basically to, well, in alignment with the '63 and '67 Voc Ed Acts. Those of you on the call that can remember back to those years. But anyway, we were put on the face of the earth to assure that instructors who were being hired by CTE centers at the time, or vocational education centers at the time, had all aspects of the industry covered. And we quickly grew to an organization that began to assess any learner in any career and technical education program, whether that be university or community college or secondary or adjudicated or incarcerated, adult populations, whatever it happens to be. We're owned and operated essentially by the 50 states and territories, and the state CTE directors are our consortium members. So, of course, 56 members, counting the territories. And that consortium elects my 11-person board. Generally speaking, we are an ISO IEC 17024 organization. So basically that means we grant accreditation to people that do particular things, that participate in different occupations, and we certify people to do different things. I'd also like to mention our subsidiary, Nocti Business Solutions, because somewhere in the I guess in the late '80s, we began also working with businesses. In fact, some of you on the call may be what we call IRCs, or Industry Resource Centers. And an IRC is typically a community college that works with Nocti Business Solutions that can provide assessments or credentials through their testing centers at a lower rate. So it enables them to actually make a teeny bit of revenue in the deal. So if you're interested in that, of course, reach out to me and I can connect you to the right people. But anyway, Nocti Business Solutions essentially is responsible for pre-employment testing for business and industry. Our marquee client is Boeing, and we do a lot of work with a lot of different organizations, SC Johnson and Hershey Foods, and a lot of folks like that. So if you're trying to get an employment with a big employer that has thousands of applicants, every time they lay out a job application, usually you'll come through our doors to make sure that you have some minimum competencies that a particular company is expecting, and that's essentially what NBS does. But going back to the other side, Nocti, we essentially work with community colleges and secondary populations to provide credentials, not only of our own. We provide about 200 credentials in 15 of the different clusters. And then we also deliver approximately 50 or 60 other credentials for other individuals. For example, we do the work for the Manufacturing Skill Standards Council, Leo and Neil Reddy's group. We do the work for American Culinary Federation. We do the work for FANUC and a whole host of other folks that don't need to be named at this point. So at this point, I want to give Josh an opportunity to kind of introduce you to America Makes, and we'll kind of go from there. So Josh, there you go.
Sounds great. And John, can you hear me okay? All right, awesome. And good afternoon and morning to everyone that's on the call. And it's always a blessed privilege to be here to talk a little bit about our work and kind of how we operate in the space and those kind of things, as well as who we are at America Makes. And I see a lot of friends and partners and those kind of things. And we're a proud supporter and a collaborator, and obviously strategic partner with NCATC and NOCTI here today. And we're going to talk about some of these things. For those of you that aren't quite up to speed on America Makes, as you've heard, America Makes is the National Innovation Institute focused on 3D printing. As Craig mentioned, there are 17 of us, brothers and sisters out there across the nation. We were set up through an act of Congress back in the Obama administration back in 2012, all focused to accelerate the adoption of 3D printing, as well as provide pathways for workforce development and training. The Institute is structured as a public-private partnership. So that's a collaboration between the public side, meaning our entities of government, and the private side, meaning our 230 plus membership companies. And then obviously our work within educational workforce development goes even beyond that into, workforce organizations, as well as community-based organizations, academic partners, and so forth. When we talk specifically within the Institute, 3 big pillars emerge. First and foremost is the technology. So the adoption and the acceleration of the technology in the innovation space, specifically to solve those programs, all mapped back to a roadmap. And then the other piece of that is the ecosystem. So that's this public-private piece of the think of the company entities, right? All of these members. How do we rally this ecosystem of folks and this national network? And then the last pillar is something I'm responsible for as the Director of Educational Workforce Development here at America Makes, is the human capital side, right? Our workforce. And when we break that up a little further, we really are focused around 4 big pillars, thought leadership being one of those. When we talk about the skills gap, and what's larger is the awareness gap in advanced manufacturing and additive manufacturing. That's a big part of what we do. The other part is filling skills or filling gaps within our roadmap and the national roadmap, not only to the body of knowledge, but ensuring that, that we're assessing the educational landscape and developing programs and projects to fill those gaps across the industry. And then a big part of our work here at America Makes is around industry recognized credentials. And that includes things like apprenticeship and internship, pre-apprenticeship, and includes obviously, credential work and those kind of things just the same. And so our goal is not to, our mission, our goal is national strategy with local impact and doing that through local partners. And so we're very much first and foremost collaboration and partnership. And our goal is to bring some of these national best practices, to our local partners to deploy local and create that impact in their community as well. So like I said, I'm excited to be here. Looking forward to sharing a little bit of this work around the credential space that we've been involved in and talk a little bit about that with John and the team as well. So thank you.
Thanks, Josh. So just a little teeny weeny bit of background in terms of the collaboration, and then we'll move into the the additive manufacturing stuff that you probably all came to hear. So we've done a number of presentations together at a conference that's been named the Credential Summit. At least that's pre-COVID, and we've also done a number of presentations at Vision with ACTE over the years. Those Credential Summit presentations involve not only organizations like America Makes, but organizations that are actually doing, additive manufacturing, groups like Orlicon and some other folks who are, relatively big names in the space, as well as community colleges who've started programs in that whole space. And, one of the partners I should mention that we've been delivering credentialing with, of course, is SME, and I know a number of those folks are on this webinar as well. But we've been delivering their SME credential for a while now, and this grant that Josh is going to talk a little bit more about the specifics of it, but essentially that's the grant that funded the credentialing opportunity that we're really focusing on during this little presentation. So for those of you who don't know much about additive manufacturing, I kind of feel like I've been thrust into it myself, because I have a son who's into it. In fact, he's a research engineer in additive manufacturing. So I I know more than a typical assessment type person would know about additive manufacturing. But we kind of started with this what if slide. What if there was a something that could transform manufacturing the way it's been done over the years? And what if it created lighter, stronger parts and systems and different engineering techniques, and it simplified the fabrication of complex designs, enable people to prototype things and to see if things would actually work structurally, and lots and lots of other benefits. And what if that same process minimized product waste and even sped up lead times, things that Craig kind of touched on when he went over those 11 pillars. So just to give you an idea of the kinds of things that additive manufacturing can do, I grabbed a quick clip from Relativity Space, and for those who don't know Relativity Space, hopefully you'll see it in this little 1-minute clip. So hopefully this works for me. If it doesn't, I may have to stop my share and restart. But let's see what happens here.
As you mentioned, Relativity is 3D printing an entire rocket. So you've actually built not just our own launch vehicle to launch satellites to orbit, but also our own 3D printers, which are by far the largest in the world. We're on track to actually launch that rocket at the end of this year from our launch site at Cape Canaveral, Florida. So we have 2 launch sites, one at Vandenberg Air Force Base, one at Cape Canaveral. We're only the 4th company to ever get a launch site with the Air Force at the Cape, and we're building rockets in a completely different way than it's been done before. Really, it's been true for the last 60 years that every aerospace factory you walk into today is building rockets one at a time by hand on a bunch of fixed tooling and CapEx with hundreds of thousands to millions of individual parts, all assembled manually. And so we really see 3D printing as an automation technology that replaces that tech stack and actually builds rockets much more quickly via software and data-driven technologies, which is what we're pioneering.
Yeah, so I don't know if you happen to catch that, but if you look at the slide and the picture that's on the kind of right-hand side of your screen, that is one huge 3D printer on a gantry that's basically building a rocket fuselage. So if you think about the time savings and the prototyping and all that sort of thing, it just kind of boggles the mind. So Josh, can you take us through a little bit more of the additive manufacturing process?
I sure can. I mean, in the simplest form, there's a couple different ways to create objects, right? Subtractive and additive. Subtractive is what is known as traditional, right? Where we're taking away material, versus additive, that's building versus, basically in space. And there's a couple different ways. There are 7 technologies of 3D printing. Most folks are very familiar with what's called material extrusion. So sometimes labeled as FDM, which is more of like the clean, it's a Kleenex of tissues. But material extrusion generally is when you see kind of that weed or string that it's, forced through an extrusion head and it builds layer by layer by layer, right? And we do that, fully digital. So when you look at additive manufacturing, it is a digital manufacturing process. We're taking an idea, digitizing it, and then allowing it to use basically X, Y, and Z to formulate a physical 3D object, from that digital file. And it does oftentimes resemble code. So if you were, if you had a 3D printer, and I know we've done this even on some of our educational resources to show how the printer reads the code, right? Because if you're a coder and you're writing code for software, it's very similar in how it produces that code in its essence. There's a couple of things that 3D printing does really well, and there are a couple of things that it doesn't do as well. And so obviously we've seen over the last year or so with COVID, 3D printing has kind of had a spotlight, right? Because it's a very agile technology, meaning that what you were doing yesterday with a 3D printer and what you need to do tomorrow is a very fast change. Versus a traditional manufacturing process, as heard in that video, right, where you have a lot of fixed tooling, you have tools and dies, you have a lot of subtractive process. It's much harder, to shift that process than it is with additive. It is not typically used for mass production. So one of the things specifically with COVID and COVID relief that was very public was masks and face shields, right? But understanding that we can print the tool and die to continue an injection molder, to continue making injection molding process, but printing the die, printing that tooling for a mask or for a shield versus printing one shield at a time. And what we're seeing within the industry specifically is the disruption of these job roles, right? So when you talk about the logistics difference between additive manufacturing and traditional, there is a tremendous difference in some of those job roles within the factory, within the facility, within the company, that is deploying that in the manufacturing environment. Most folks don't realize that, the breadth of materials that goes from everything from alloys and polymers and carbon fiber, to things like sand and glass and those kind of things. So, and I've often said, I came from a classroom many years ago, back in the early 2000s, when we were teaching additive specifically. And I said to those students way back then, how cool to be part of a generation that still will define this technology. I said in front of all of you in 2021, here saying the same thing. We still haven't found the end of where this technology can go as far as, 3D printing with hemp protein, and then printing stem cells on top of that hemp protein to grow a lung and those kind of things. And so, I mean, there's amazing frontiers and innovation that continues to happen, both in the commercial space, the private sector, as well as in the Department of Defense, and across that ecosystem in the industrial defense space as well. So we talked specifically, and we talked a little bit about America Makes Past. Obviously the Institute was stood up in 2012. That was way after additive manufacturing itself, was developed and those kind of things. And so there's a timeline here that goes back, obviously, and you'll see back in 1986 on this slide with what's called stereolithography. And that's commonly referred to as an STL, and that's the file type that's used. So it's taking a three-dimensional object and basically slicing it in very thin layers. I often, when I talk to folks about 3D printing, think of a ream of paper, right? And that STL file basically says each sheet of paper, is that layer that 3D printer is printing. And so there's an opportunity, from the opportunity to create the digital file in that space, move that to, obviously, as you can see the timeline, to the first SLA printer, and then, a couple other of the key markers there that are talked about. But as I mentioned earlier, one of the biggest things that we focus on specifically around education and workforce training is understanding that additive manufacturing is a process, and understanding that you go from ideation, innovation, design, understanding how do I take this design that can be sketched or it can be in a CAD software, create that digital file representation, create the code, often called slicing, actually print that object, and then go through what we call post-processing. So understand that that we need to post-process a file. That is very different than what happens in a lot of classrooms. Typically. So one of the things that we focused on, and this work is part of that keystone. John mentioned some of the work with the Society of Manufacturing Engineers and SME and Tooling U around the credential space as well. We vetted that framework years ago around that credential as well. A lot of that work is focused on ensuring that there's rigor in education. We're focused on this process because one of the things that's happened in the academic space, as well as in the home space, even where 3D printing is deployed, is that oftentimes it was, I download a file and print it. And so we were losing, obviously, very iterative stages of 3D printing, which also can lead to confusion in the marketplace of availability of career opportunities or job opportunities within the market. And so we focused a lot around that, but you can see how the industry has grown. We consider this trend to continue to grow more and more. You can see, for example, there's a note about 4.8 billion, within industry by 2024. That trajectory on a chart is extremely steep. meaning that the investment of the technology, the deployment of that technology, especially after the last year that we had and what can be seen around agile manufacturing specifically, will continue to grow. And so it's important for these types of conversations today, obviously, that we are talking, how do we then spool workforce up behind that, and a capable knowledge workforce that we can validate and show those pathways as well. Go ahead, John, you kick to the next one.
Thanks, Josh. Sorry about the slippery finger there. So with those processes, of course, most of you know that there has to evolve standards that those processes are based on. And, you know, in my world, you know, in psychometrics and those sorts of things, that standard, of course, you know, revolves around, you know, APA, the American Psychological Association, and the National Science of Testing Measurements, and the ISO 17024 that I mentioned earlier. But there's other standards too, and you know, they evolve from within the community, within the additive manufacturing community. So, Josh, do you want to say anything about those?
Yeah, sorry, I muted myself. Yeah, and I think, do we have another slide that talks a little bit about the ASTM and the ISO standards as well? You know, one of the things that America Makes really set out to do early on, and this is a continued development of work, is really collaborate with some of those folks that are setting some of the standards, right? And so you will see the ASTM additive manufacturing standards. That was a joint collaborative effort with America Makes to validate that across our membership as well. There are a couple published bodies of knowledge specific to these that really standardized language, standardized processes, standardized you know, technologies and those kind of things. Because when you have an emerging technology that can be disruptive, it's extremely important to have these standards to anchor back to. And so again, we know on the education and workforce development side, we're playing catch up on that a little bit, you know, compared to where the technology is, you know, within the standards development. But I don't think we're too far behind on that. And I think we're going to catch up extremely fast. And you can see some of the ISO standards here specifically when we talk about how do we develop, you know, these procedures to align to those training resources and programs and those kind of things, just the same. And for those folks that are looking for what those standards are, and when we talk a little bit about nuts and bolts about this work with NOCTI and the work with SME as well, was ensuring that when we talk these standards, they're in the body of knowledge that we anchor all of these things back to. So one of the things that we've heard early out of some of the pilots in deploying some industry recognized credentials, you know, specifically in the spring with NOCTI, was that a lot of folks were like, wow, we knew nothing around these standards. We didn't understand the terminology. It wasn't on the radar. It wasn't in the curriculum, you know, and that kind of stuff. And so that's good. You know, we're disrupting that conversation to say, we need this. Industry says we need this. You know, we need this embedded into these programs. And so, yes, it's disruptive even in the academic environment, you know, to say, you know, to ask that question of, you know, is this really warranted? But the fact that it was a glaring gap proves that it's important work that we're here doing to uncover some of these stones as well. So we'll talk a couple of these, and you heard John mention earlier, you know, of some of NOCTI's work specifically, and America Makes was part of some of this work, and I know we have some folks from Tooling USME on the line as well. You know, there is a certification, there's 2 levels of certification that's offered through SME, one of those being the Certified Additive Manufacturing Fundamentals, and the other one, the Certified Additive Manufacturing Technician. And America Makes, you know, we were part of the group that helped validate the body of work that anchors to. We at the Institute champion that work, you know, throughout our portfolio, as well as anchor back a number of, you know, bodies of knowledge back to that framework as well. It's important that, you know, we're all building from that same blueprint. And when we look at what, you know, that body of knowledge, you know, really understanding knowledge, skills, and abilities, KSAs, within those job roles as well. Most, you know, and when we talk credentials, industry recognized credentials that America Makes, you know, we look at those as a K through grade pathway, just like we do with all of our portfolio. And so we look at these opportunities within credentialing as a stackable as also meeting folks in all varieties of learners, paths of life, walks of life as well. And so this is one of those, when we embarked on this with John and the team at Nocti, we really were filling this gap within that high school realm, potentially downstream from high school a little bit as well, to add some rigor here. So we really look at the work that's been done and continuing to grow within Tool and USME is kind of the one that stacks on top of this Nocti credential. We've been partnering with SME to refresh some of this through a program called the Manufacturing Engineering Education Program, an acronym referred to as MEEP. And then we're also looking to deploy some of this. So we've done some of this. You heard John mention the NIST project. So we did have some deployment of credentialing as well as reskill and upskill opportunities, offering content, those kind of things through Tooling USME is a great partner and a member of America Makes as well. Next slide for me, John. So when we talk specifically about some of the work that we've done with Nocti, and this is extremely fresh work. This was work that we've embarked on over probably the last year or so. And referred to as essentials of additive manufacturing. Our target is high schoolers, specifically here. We know it'll kind of grow in that gray area, a little bit higher, a little bit lower, maybe, within here, but really focused on looking at, that cross-curricular approach to additive manufacturing, ensuring that we're hitting the entire process, ensuring that students can see an on-ramp into the industry here. And then, when we talk specifically about, that credential pathway, as well as that K through grade pathway, it's understanding how do we build on, for example, everything all the way down to micro badges for middle schoolers. How do we stack those micro badges to a full digital badge? How do we then take full digital badges that happen in the early high school, late middle school? How do we then take these deep dives into industry recognized credentials in high school, stack those then into community colleges, stack those on either further niche programs, for example, even working some that are specific to machinists who will get certified in post-processing additive parts, right? So we are looking across the industry here, but building that. And so when we set out to do this work, obviously, following the great process that Nocti has and the ISO standard here and development of these credentials, but really looking at that body of knowledge, making sure it's anchored back, assembling a extremely diverse industry team here as well, and then ensuring that it was broad enough that it could reach all of these audiences, right? So we weren't just looking at, what's the use of additive within aerospace, those kind of things. So making sure that we reached across the industries, and I know we'll talk a little bit later, but obviously everyone knows, both a knowledge and performance-based assessment. We are an extreme advocate of the hands-on education, hence, Craig's comment at the forefront, around ensuring that these are active, problem-based, project-based programs and those kind of things, just the same.
Yeah, and we also, I guess I just want to take a second and underscore that word beyond. I mean, it's underlined up in the PowerPoint slide, but the fact that Josh mentioned about this credential's ability to reach down into lower grades. I mean, if you've been in a secondary program or even a middle level program, in the last 2-3 years, you've probably seen a lot of these 3D printers all over the place. I mean, in the CTE world at the secondary level, you'll see them in culinary programs being used to push chocolate sculpture. You'll see them in commercial arts programs where a commercial arts student will have to develop a character and then have to actually build that character to see what the character looks like, to design a marketing strategy around them and those sorts of things. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, because these machines are so ubiquitous in the school environment, we wanted to take advantage of them as much as we could when we put these standards in place. So, we had significant industry support too. So, maybe Josh, you could talk a little bit about our validation partners.
Absolutely. Yeah. And we had, so obviously anytime we launch a project like this, it's key, and it's key to our educational workforce development strategy that these resources and assets are always built to the voice of industry and defense. And so, again, obviously NOCTI has an extremely rigorous process to validate and build, and the frameworks, and SME and Tooling USME have that same, following the same standard there. But it's important for us to assemble those members, right? So you'll see a couple of names here, Raytheon Technologies, United Technology Corporation as well. So two of the lead components of driving forces here. And we had a multitude of folks that contributed to the development of kind of the blueprint. And so these weren't one single person. They were a number of folks from these teams, from a variety of roles and positions. And then even folks that had lead points of contact that were taking them back to teams of technicians, teams of engineers, teams of designers, teams of quality and certification folks. And so if you're not familiar with Raytheon or United Technologies, they were part of the folks that put the Mars Lunar Rover up there, and really brings a unique perspective. And we've had and engaged this team with even some tech talks, out to schools and those kind of things. You'll see a couple other partners down on the left is some of the printer providers or OEMs, original equipment folks that have also validated. And then we have probably at least 24 other industry members, small and medium business members that validated and vetted the framework, right? So once the blueprint was generated, we as America Makes then shared this out with a larger steering committee group that was able to look and review, validate, ask questions, all those kind of things. The other thing that happened that I think is tremendously important, also coming from a classroom years ago, was we had educators represented on this team. And those included high school educators, they included post-secondary educators. And then we also had third-party folks that weren't part of the development process that also then looked at the test after and had a fresh set of eyes to validate and ensure that the content's on point for the age. It was on point for what technology they would have access to, as well as for deployment and scale within the industry and the educational landscapes that exist as well. So a great team, assembled here to ensure that we're really meeting the need within industry.
Yeah, thanks. And I'll talk just a brief amount on the development process, because what we really want to do is show you, some of the blueprint and, what you can do to help us. But basically, you see the development process laid out there, and both Josh and I have kind of talked around it, putting together the experts and making sure that we, do a top-notch job in terms of facilitation of those subject matter experts and asking the right questions and doing the right kind of follow-up, and determining that body of knowledge at the appropriate level. The reason that administer pilot tests is highlighted now is because what happened to us is what happened to every school and person across the country, and in fact across the world. And that was COVID. So in the middle of our piloting of this particular blueprint, we got caught up in the fact that schools were, kind of relegated to the remote world for the most part. So where we are in this process is we're maybe half to 2/3 of the way through administering pilot tests. And we have to take care of that pilot testing because we have to analyze that data and establish how well the individual items are working, be they performance items or be they written items. We still have to determine how well they're working. And then we have to go through the additional work of establishing what we think employers would want to see in terms of a passing score or a score where a credential could be given to an individual. So kind of without further ado, let me show you the blueprint, at least what we refer to at NOCTI as the standards level. And you also see some of what we call weighting and rating there. This is another part of the development process whereby you engage with the subject matter experts, that Josh mentioned, and you try to determine what the most important features of this particular occupation and this particular credential assessment is. And in this case, as you can see, fundamentals, because this is a basic kind of test came out quite high, as well as understanding the processes and materials. And you can see the percentages on the other items as well. You'll notice down there at the bottom left-hand corner that there's a way for you to actually look at the blueprint if you'd like to see it. And actually a couple slides ahead, there's a QR code. So if you'd like to just capture the QR code, with a camera or whatever, you can certainly do that. And I would imagine that Craig will have this webinar archived, and you can access it that way as well. But anyway, you can see that the targeted number of questions there was 120, and the administration time that was targeted was 2 hours. Now, this is prior to the piloting phase and prior to the item analysis phase and prior to the cut score establishment phase. So there's these are targets, pretty much as it says, they're targeted number of questions and administrative time to take the assessment. And if we look at the performance test or the skill-based part, you'll see there's kind of 4 standards, and they're relatively equal in terms of their percentage. These are all able to be performed on equipment that you probably have in your facilities. As you can see, the slicer software setup that Josh so eloquently described with the ream of paper, the 3D printer hardware itself set up an establishment, making the drawings rather than just grabbing something off a Thingiverse and just printing it, actually, designing these STL files, and then of course troubleshooting those files when they don't print properly. Was it the slicer software? Was it the original sketch? What was it? So how do you troubleshoot these 3D projects that we develop? So again, we're looking at a targeted number of jobs, about 4, and we're looking at administrative time of about 2 hours. For those of you who aren't familiar with our performance tests, these are generally evaluated by what we call occupational advisory committee members. So those are the local employers in the vicinity that have expertise in evaluating these kinds of things. So that's another important component to remember. So I promised you a QR code. If you take a shot of that QR code, or if you look at it some other time, that will take you to the blueprints, both the written and performance as they exist now. But we've talked throughout this little presentation about the importance of credentialing and how it serves as a validation of those KSAs, the knowledge and skills that folks possess, and it provides connections to industry and students. We hope that not only a credential provides validation for a particular industry, but it also provides a sense of accomplishment and a sense of recognition for the students who acquire them. And, ultimately, the hope is that would help them advance in a particular career field, wherever that happens to land them. Because the concepts in this particular credential could be applied to other areas of manufacturing as well, as in addition to just the additive manufacturing components. And lastly, we believe this thing will build a bridge between digital badge work and micro-credential work that Josh kind of alluded to. So we're excited to get this thing finalized and get it out to folks to be able to use it and take full advantage of having a nice solid basic level credential in the additive manufacturing world. So Josh is going to tell you a little bit about how to get involved, and I'll be quiet.
Yeah, absolutely. And you can kick to that next slide. We'll talk a little bit about the pilot tests, the pilot opportunity specifically, and just to echo some of John's thoughts there. With Jolie and Lisa and the whole team, I can assure you that we spent a lot of nights as that steering committee met over November, December, January, February. A lot of nights debating this question or the verbiage of these questions, or do we include this and those kind of things. So the only way really to get this out into the stream, and yes, we had educators on the team. Yes, we've had industry members, but we want to make sure, as John mentioned, we want to validate the process, right? We want to validate and ensure, is there a problem with the way a question was worded, and those kind of things. So this is a key part of getting out and piloting this with us. NOCTI has been a tremendous partner to offer a slew of kind of the prize bag for piloting as well. So there's some good kind of freebies out there, or at least some no cost pieces for those pilot sites. At America Makes, one of the things that we would like to do as folks are interested in piloting this out to your network of students is we will be working to deploy 3D printers for folks who may not have access to one or need additional printers as well. So we do, and we're going to put some stuff together to get some printers out into the network for those folks that say, hey, yeah, I'm raising my hands. I'd love to pilot 25. The cool part is, I believe NOCD then, is saying, hey, we're going to then, once this is fully validated, all of those students will receive another, free, fully validated credential, and we're going to give you some no-cost testing down the road for the next group as well, which is just tremendous. And we certainly appreciate all the effort of the team here as well. But as John mentioned, there's a QR code. If you had a chance to snag that, I know Craig's recording. I know we'll send some follow-up material as well. But take a look at the blueprint. Take a look at what's out there. It'll detail what's on the actual assessment and the performance-based assessment. One of the really great parts of that performance-based assessment, if you were following along, even things like troubleshooting, look at failed prints and saying, why would that have failed? So getting into that higher order thinking to really, prove out, yes, can I hit the ground running, within the industry, again, at this entry level, first step in the industry, adding some rigor for these students as well. So take a look at the blueprint. There is a pilot testing site application that's on the website at NOCD, where you can, if you're interested, obviously, if you reach out to myself or John, we'll get you there as well. There's a tremendous team that backs all of this stuff up at NOCD. And then again, look at that plan for knowledge-based pilot testing. One of the things that the team has done tremendously well is pivot where we know where we may have some learners that are virtual, and hopefully that's not the case this year, but we'll see how that goes. And then look at that skills-based pilot as well. We've even worked with some sites, to get creative on those kind of things. But we as America Makes and all of our members out in these communities, can help, rally the troops locally and bring some folks to the table around that as well. So really excited to have you with us, and your interest around additive manufacturing and the opportunity to bring some rigor and some industry recognized credentials to the classroom. But certainly, like I said, look at this opportunity with these no-cost pilots and potential to launch some of that within your classroom.
So yeah, that's our concluding slide, and our contact information is on that. Of course, you know how to get a hold of Craig, and Craig can certainly get a hold of us as well. So we hope that you'll help us out a little bit and move this pilot forward, because we really feel there's a lot of benefit for students and for the industry. And we also think, by the way, that once this thing gets out into the wild, the longitudinal data that it'll generate for schools will also be helpful to continuously improve, the instructional program. Once you have standards laid out and you work against those standards, or work to those standards, I should say, different cohorts of students coming through that assessment give you data that will help you, modify and tweak your instructional program as well, which is something that we didn't really address on the slide. So anyway, Craig, I think the presentation goes back to you, and I'll just stop my share here.
Well, no problem at all with your share. I appreciate more than you know as for the NCATC members, as well as external folks that aren't members of our organization that attended today. Thank you for your expertise. Thank you for your sharing all that you've been doing over the last year or two and how it's ramped up. It is in our sweet spot, as you know, of getting standards connected with curriculum and education and training and workforce development. So if there aren't any questions, we might have 10 minutes giving back to everybody, but I don't see any questions coming in the chat box. Maybe we pause for 20 or 15 seconds and see if anybody has any typing going on, but right now, I'm not sure. I think I think you've either answered all the questions in your presentation, or people are taking notes and they're going to contact you afterwards. But we will have this recording on our website, starting in the next 24 or 48 hours. And we'll share it with Nocti and America Makes as well so they can do the same. And there's a lot of information I think that will be coming beyond today that we'll share in our network as well. Any final comments, Josh or John, before we close out the webinar today?
Craig, the only thing I would add is as folks are looking at the blueprint and looking for these things, just know America Makes is standing by to help, right? I mean, because we'll have a lot of folks that'll look at that and say, but I don't have the curricula, right? Or where do I find these resources to help prepare, for to launch a pilot or to build up to, the performance-based or the knowledge-based assessment, those kind of things. We're here to help. We have a variety of programs, both historically from, we've had 114 since 2012, but we have 20 active projects in the portfolio. So we're always looking for folks that want to do great work, looking to collaborate and make impact in their own community.
Great.
Yeah, I could say the same thing, not from the additive manufacturing perspective, but just from wanting to be a pilot test site. If you're not one already, it's a real easy process to become a testing site. Talk to some of the folks that were mentioned during this webinar. We'll connect you. There's no cost to any of that kind of thing. So we can certainly help you get ready for the pilot testing and get your school ready and answer questions of a technical nature in terms of, how you need to deliver the assessment and the credentialing behind that. So yeah, thanks.
Thank you again, both of you, for your time and sharing all that you've been doing with our group today. And we'll keep this in our communications going forward, because it's just a starting point for getting people involved on the new level of essentials for additive manufacturing certification and credentials. And appreciate your time, Josh and John, very much, and your partnership with NCTC all these years. We'll keep this rolling, and without any other questions, we thank you all for attending today, and we'll be in touch. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.